Especially about your grandfather.
Oh boy.
Anyway, this is primarily the Chuck Schuch file, the stuff I found, but it's not everything.
Yeah.
Because your mother
Is a rock in there?
was in the newspaper all the time.
No kidding. Was she in trouble?
She was picked up DUI. No, I'm just kidding. She was in every club, and of course she sang all over.
Yeah.
And it was every week in the Morenci Observer.
No kidding.
Under Lions News.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Gladys made sure that if there was news from Lions for kids, wasn't it?
It was amazing. Anyway, okay. So Jacob and Regina Schuch.
Yep.
Okay, Jacob's the one that came over when he was 6 years old.
Yep.
Okay. Their total footprint, once I did all the Schuchs, okay, was 1,149. From two people, we generated,
Amazing.
1,149, and that includes all the in-laws, which, even if they were remarried, anybody that touched the family, okay? There was some adoptions, very few, but I included them as regular family, and then there was, Aunt Bess had a ton of stepkids and grandkids, so.
He's a fat rock.
Anyway, that includes everybody. Now,
Yeah.
out of that
Or his
1,149,
eyeballs. Might keep the door from closing.
our great-grandparents
One door will close.
constituted
Well, that what makes it
about
easy for you to open.
72% of that figure. Our family
You don't have fingernails.
wound up being 835. And,
Wow.
and of
You
course,
like the heavy truck?
Clarence and Louise was the largest.
Sure.
Does it make you tired
That
of
was
being
300 and some, so, yeah,
That kind of mattered in the day. Having kids.
yeah.
It's a big deal.
So, anyway, and then your mom and dad stuff, just some pictures, and it's what I put in the file.
Not quite all the way.
And we found,
Well, that makes it easy for you to
we've
open.
been to the grave sites of just about all of the
Yeah,
adults.
tell them you've been to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we went to Pennsylvania.
Truck?
We found our double great grandma and grandmas
Yeah, we found,
and our triple great grandma.
yeah, Peter and Barbara Drum, okay, they're the ones that came over from Germany. It was Barbara Schuch, but anyway.
Yep.
Well, where's the green
And,
patch? You put the green patch.
They came over in 1840, so, anyway,
Yeah, it's in the barn. It's in the cow.
1840 to where did they?
into Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
They landed in New York naturally, and then, this would be, okay, so that's William Schuch, that'd be our great-grandfather. And this was the 4 Schuch boys.
Came over from Germany.
No,
Yeah,
So there's a Charles here.
yes, now Charles had a farm over here in West Unity.
That's the one, huh?
Yeah, he and William, Are the
this
ones-
is Jacob's kid.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
he and
Jacob came over, but he was just like 9 years old.
Yeah.
So
he and William came over,
it gets confusing.
they're the ones that came here and settled in Ohio from Pennsylvania. He actually, I can't find it, but his oldest son was born in Waldron. Okay, but if you look at a map on where Waldron is and where Fayette is,
After the weekend and.
Yeah, you're down the road.
they're
Yeah.
just like this. So
So you would think, in all my years of business, there's been Schuchs, but there ain't never been a Schuch like our Schuch. And when you guys were saying, well, you're going to have a hard time finding,
yeah,
because
you,
Brian's got a bunch of Schuchs in it, not a bunch, but they got Schuchs in it, Williams County.
Seems like a puppet.
And
yeah, but now
So you put your,
they could be our cousins.
yeah,
And the reason is because,
you need grown up.
okay, Peter Schuch, who was Jacob Schuch's brother, we found him over here in Pioneer.
One too. We have 3 of them. There's this little
We
one.
found
I don't know if any other ones on here.
his sister, a Krisher,
He's got a
was
button.
also
I don't think he opens
over
on this
by
one. Is the
Pioneer.
button open there?
And then
Close it up.
Peter's son,
Close it.
I haven't done the research on it, I just did a little look, but
No, it must be worked by.
his first wife died, and so he married a Schuch, but it was S-H-O-O-K.
Yeah.
So this is how this is all,
Yeah.
so those S-H-O-O-K.
There are a lot of SHOOKs around,
They could be distant.
Well, listen.
but they're really not.
If you
Because
had
the
a chance to
paperwork-
change the spelling of your last name
Yeah.
growing up, wouldn't you just went S-H-O-O-K?
Well, now,
We'll throw another curve at you.
all right.
Because you got shutched. You got such shutched your whole life.
Oh yeah, I got shush. But okay, you're gonna talk about the spelling.
Okay, so our real name may have been Schuch.
That's from one of the Disney movies.
Because, and of course, when, you know, they come over from Germany, it's a strong German dialect, okay?
It's a
The,
compass. The direction he's going, I guess.
let's see, yeah, the youngest one, Jacob Harry, okay? He's the one that wound up in Montana as an engineer.
Ah.
And I found his granddaughter, or both of his granddaughters. His granddaughter was one of them that came to our family.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
But anyway, her sister found
Yes, yep, I think the
a
rock and
deed.
diamond are in there.
in his old briefcase that was Peter
This guy's
Schuch, S-C-H-U-G, had just purchased 100
Laura
acres
probably does.
in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, in Coggan Station.
Pretty much all the
So,
same.
it
It's not coincidence. It was shook, but shook. Yeah.
well, but if you go back into the genealogy chain or the various channels,
Lion from
you'll see Schuch as prominent. So I think what he did is this deed, they just couldn't understand what he was saying, so they just said Schuch.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Did
That's
you
the way
ever?
his will
Pete's
is.
Dragon.
Peter's
Pete's
will
Dragon.
was
Pete's
signed.
Dragon movie.
Should.
His arms
I
are.
can't remember.
That's right.
Yeah, we found when we were out to Pennsylvania, we happened to go to a museum out there, and the gal said, "Oh, we got a curator here. You should talk to him."
Which is a dragon breed.
So, but you have to join the museum in order to talk to this guy. So I joined the museum so we could do that. And he found all kinds of. We found Peter's
Movies, they
will,
use fire.
and Gary, if you're about his wife got 1/3, and it's really wild.
That was because, see,
Vicky.
Jacob's farm and Peter's farm was next door to each other. Okay, and back then, however it works, Jacob wound up getting
This is that guy.
the farm, and
Another Woody. His name
he
is
was
Woody.
probably the primary caregiver as they got older.
Snow.
And
Snow
when
White.
Peter died, Barbara was still alive, and she got 1/3 of the farm income. So that makes sense. You've got Jacob, Regina, and Barbara. She got a cow
And a pig, I think.
and a pig. I believe that's what it
I
was.
think it was, yeah.
So, it's wild what you can really find.
Now, did your mom and dad or anybody ever say Schuch? The name was Schuch
Yes,
and was silent.
Aunt Mary said that.
Okay. See, that's what
But-
my dad said originally.
Yeah.
It was Schuch.
But
You
Aunt
just
Mary
dropped
also
the N.
said it was Shahut. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. There are a lot of ways to say it.
yeah. But if you went by the actual German vernacular, I would imagine, because of the way
You're right.
it would be
It would end
like
with.
Shahut. Something similar to that, so.
Yep.
So anyway,
Well, this is all your grandpa's stuff now. That's Grandpa and Grandma. That's your grandpa's mom and dad. Mm-hmm. That's Clarence and Louise.
Be your great grandpa now.
Yeah, right.
Looks like I remember them.
It's probably
this is,
Their
probably their
anniversary.
6th.
I'll bet it
Yes.
was too, because I remember that picture.
Yes.
no, there's their, that
Well,
was their
that's-
sixth.
Okay. Yeah.
This was at, well, you know, they probably both are.
Looks about the same.
You're
doesn't
saying
it?
their 60th
Yeah,
anniversary?
yeah.
You got a flower,
You can tell,
pinstripe.
and here's how you tell the difference between the pictures. With their 50th and 60th, he's lost weight, and so that's how I know it's his
Yeah.
60th
Yeah.
because there's a lot more. You can
Okay.
see a lot more
Collar.
of his neck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I have the 60th picture. I think you might have the 50th.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So
So
there's
that's
the
all the
clan.
kids.
There's
Yep.
the clan right
All
there.
their
There's-
kids.
That's the only picture I can find where all of them were there.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's Grandpa right there. This is their dad. Where do we suppose that picture was taken at? Was that it?
That's Union
Leroy's?
City.
Oh, not Leroy's, but
No,
Bayless's.
no.
No,
Okay.
this is at the
There was
schoolhouse.
a
Okay.
little schoolhouse there.
There was
in
just
Union
down
City that-
I don't know if you remember
yeah.
the little house they lived
Yeah.
in. But just not too far from that little house, there was an old schoolhouse. And they had turned that into like a
Going
center.
into town from there, as if you were going back.
Yes, if you're going back
I
towards
remember.
town.
Yeah.
It was
Not
kind
too
of
far
on-
from there.
It was kind of on a point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's that little,
Sure
that's where they had their, must have been their 60th there.
That's
And this is
it.
1967.
Yeah.
So they were married in 1907.
Mm-hmm.
I guess would be.
And he died shortly after that.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember 67. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was my freshman year in college when he died. Because I came up from Angola
Funeral.
to be in the funeral.
Gosh, remember what you don't remember, and I remember that day.
Oh yeah.
I remember just all the grandkids.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all the cousins. I remember a lot of people being there. Funny how that's amazing what you remember.
Yeah.
I was one of the pallbearers. So
The funny thing out of that funeral is that, and Linda and I talked about this at the family meal afterwards. She said, she looked and said, "Did you notice not one person shed a tear?" And it was like,
You guys noticed that?
and I'm
he
going,
did. He did. I didn't. Well, I was setting up with the pallbearers.
but where we were sitting, I was sitting back where Linda and I were sitting.
Yeah, where you would have been in the
Yeah.
back row.
Yeah, and that was the one thing that she said. When we walked out, she said, "Did you notice nobody said shed a tear?" I said, "You're right. I can still see my dad there." And my dad just sat he sat in a chair, and he sat sideways. He didn't even look towards the coffin, the casket.
He probably didn't want to be
He,
there.
he sat sideways like this. And he just sat there. No expression. That was so vivid because, like, you know, my granddad Dilbert, when he died, people were crying and they were,
Yeah.
you know, but it was like,
That is really strange.
you know, but,
I remember the thing on the casket. I think it said 36 grandchildren. From the grandchildren, they had
yes. Yeah, there was,
of all the things I remember, I just remember going, wow, 36.
I don't remember that, but
they actually wound up being more than that.
Oh, sure.
Because there were some infant deaths. And, you know, Aunt Vera lost her one son, Harold Wayne, and then there was a couple of them.
well, Aunt Mildred had lost
Yeah.
a dog.
So-
I think it was 36. I just remember that
It could
band
be,
band
yeah.
being on there and
Yeah.
going, man, that's a
I
lot.
think it was around 40.
36 or 38, something like that.
Yeah.
We were driving down, and I said, because we were commenting about that, and how close my mother's family was at the same size. That, you know,
Sure.
that there was 38
Yeah.
grandkids.
Well, they had 10, and you know, on the Schuch side there were 11. So
In my whole life, I never got the meanness of Clarence ever. And I'm sure my mom and dad knew
I got
that.
the temper, but I didn't.
They knew that every day.
I didn't inherit much of the meanness, but I did get the temper.
That's amazing.
You know,
I never got any of that.
Downtown.
But it was all around.
Busier downtown than we do.
well,
We've found even more as we've done.
we've talked about,
Oh, wow. Is it, if they're going
You know,
towards Lacion or whatever?
of
Yeah.
Clarence's 4 sons.
Stop and.
Clarence
And
loses
it's
4
US highway,
boys.
so it gets a lot of semi.
I never saw Uncle Ivan ever
Raise a hand.
do anything or try to correct his children, you know.
I
No,
remember that about him.
no punishment. My dad, never.
Soft-spoken.
And that was an agreement when my mom and dad got married. My dad said, okay, if we have children, you're in
We
charge
should
of.
hear it when it starts up, because he's
And,
gonna do this.
I can only
right
remember
till
one time he got
it's
mad and
right
helped
by
me.
the cemetery.
And he probably had more
Cross
reason to get mad
track,
at me
that
that,
one, and
you
you always
know,
take your horn on a train.
Our dad's the same way.
Yeah.
Never touched us kids. My mom did
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
discipline.
Basically,
So they
mom,
probably all
Yeah,
agree.
the train, something's
well,
going
except
on
for
down the
Paul,
line that they have
but
to stop here
Paul,
Well, they
for.
Paul
claim-
was different.
okay, so I actually,
I mean, I can still
There's
remember,
railroad ties.
I'm sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
I can still remember Paul when we would go out to Lloyd's and stuff.
Sometimes
He would say, "Do you want me to take my belt off?" And he would actually pull the belt over his pants
Too.
and
You
lay it
do
on,
it too, don't you?
and lay it on. And
all the way shoot.
you know, that's why his
Because that's
kids.
the Martha Barman.
But I never put the connection together between the three older boys
No, I didn't either.
and him.
Yeah,
You know?
but the three older boys. But I think part of that was they served in the war.
And he didn't.
And Dad always said that the best thing that ever happened to him, I don't know about your dad, was that he went in. It helped him learn to control his temper. Because if it hadn't been for that, I'm not sure my mom would have married him,
Tim,
you know.
Tim.
But that, he said that was the
there's
best
a
thing
TV in there.
that ever happened to him, was
If you
it
don't.
helped him learn to control his temper.
and we,
So,
I think that in reality, the reason my dad and Clarence really didn't get along
Thank
is
you.
I think that
And I love you.
my dad was a carbon copy.
yeah.
And just from the stories I've heard and
So you ever hear any stories about the boys getting into it with each other?
what, did you ever notice my dad's crooked finger?
I always did.
Oh,
Okay,
do you
what
know
that
the
was?
story about that?
No,
Okay.
I just knew the finger was crooked.
Okay,
So
here the story
Yeah.
is that he and Uncle Ivan were in charge of, they had some kind of
It's been like a wooden box or
a
something.
rigged up box that they would chop straw,
oh,
okay, and, you know, and it was their job, they had to do it.
I think they were shredding cabbage.
And that could be,
I think
whatever
that's
they
what-
were
yeah.
cutting up, okay? And Dad even said, he told me once, he goes, I'm sure he did it on purpose, because he was my older brother, okay? But he said, Ivan was in charge of the knife, and that's what happened. Dad was feeding it, and he got his finger cut.
And they never took him in and had it,
And
what?
they never took him in.
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's the way it healed.
Grandma hooked it up, and,
That's why he had that finger. Yeah.
No.
yeah.
I mean, when you're in war or you've worked your life and you're young, you just go, you're just old. Stuff like that must happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Oh my gosh.
But Dad and Ivan were, I mean, Ivan was quite a few years older than
he
him,
was
but they
5 years
were,
older.
but they were very close as children. They did a lot of stuff together. I think it probably kept both of them reasonably, somewhat sane,
Yeah.
because we've heard so many stories that,
I just always remember Uncle Ives being a big guy. You know,
He was.
when I look at your dad and my dad,
Yeah.
but if you see older pictures, I don't know if you got the one with him on,
I don't.
we got one of him on a tractor.
He was
Ivan.
stout.
He was
I mean, he
slender. He was, you know, when he was working the farm and stuff.
I'll bet
When
he was a
back
big-
when he was
big.
after the war and stuff, he was tall and slender,
Yeah.
but he did get bigger.
Mom
after he
always
got
said that
older.
he wasn't the same after he came back,
Right.
because he saw sun. You know,
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
was in really bad stuff.
my dad
was
always,
too.
said that he always said Ivan and Chuck saw the worst part of the war.
Yeah.
He said, I was lucky where I was at.
see, that's what Adam has. One of the things he said, and I only know that because of you two, because we all know my dad wouldn't say boo about that war.
My dad wouldn't say much.
Except, I don't know if I ever told you this. I brought Mom down one time to see your mom and dad. I think this was probably shortly before your dad died. And we're sitting there, and he starts talking about what he did in the war, in liberating concentration camps.
Jeez, oh.
And so he's telling this story, and I'm sitting by your mom, and I look over at him, and she looks at me and says,
Never heard it.
I've never heard that before. So he told me just a few things, you know, that he went through. You know, and then Uncle Ivan, he was in the Anzio beach landing, where they landed in Italy. He was part of where they got up into the mountains in
Battle of the Caves.
in northern Italy.
Yeah.
And he must have done really good because he was a 4-stripe sergeant. He was an E4 sergeant. So, and I think he was in the artillery.
He was in artillery, he started in Africa, he was part of the
Yeah.
African campaign, and then he was in the,
To Sicily and then into Italy. And he got malaria when he was in Italy. Mom would say periodically he would have a recurring bout of that when he got back to the States. I mean, I didn't know that until Mom told me that after he died. So yeah, between the two of them, I mean, Dad had it tough because he was out in the jungle, but he wasn't.
There was nothing good at all about that damn thing. Other than it was over and we ended up winning. So
Yeah, that's
And it was something that we almost. It was probably a war that we had to fight.
yeah.
You know. Since then, I don't think there's any wars that we had to fight, especially Vietnam. But,
You were right about that.
that's the only
I got very
when
lucky about Vietnam.
when I was at my grandfather's funeral. That's when I met you, and we were in that the meal afterwards,
Okay.
and you sat down and told me that he had liberated. This was 2013, over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
First time I remember meeting you. And then you said that and then left, and that's kind of what it has always stuck in the back of my head, where I was like, I didn't ask more questions. I didn't.
No.
I was in a different headspace there.
My
And
dad, about the last 10 years.
See, I think
He
that's
got-
all I heard from mine. When he got that World War II hat, I was astounded.
this one here.
Yeah.
That he,
Now, see, my dad would even wear something like that.
my dad, but probably the last 5 years. Probably.
Okay.
did he?
Never.
Right.
But Dad was about the last 10 years. He pulled out pictures.
Yes.
He has a photo album. I don't know. Lisa or somebody got the photo album. I don't know who's got the photo album, but he went through. He had a photo album, and him and Mom sat down and wrote on the back of what all this is. And I mean, there's a picture of him holding this giant python that somebody had killed. And he was over in northern India and Burma, and up in the rainforest. They were building the roads to go over the Himalayas to get to so they could fight in China. And that's what he was doing.
I asked him once, I said, so, I mean, he was in motor pool.
Right.
He was a mechanic.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you and I talked about, nothing those boys couldn't fix. They and,
I know, they're all that motor.
Yeah.
If it's a
Yes.
combustion engine,
And-
I'm on it. And if it don't run right, he used to piss me off. He'd be, pull that over here.
Oh yeah, we had
got a bar
a
to be
lawnmower one time, and I'd go out during the day while Dad was at work to try to start that son of a gun, and I couldn't get it started, and my temper showed. So Dad would come home, he'd walk out, he'd do something, and give it one yank, and it would start right up. So
but they all had the knack.
Yeah.
And even my mom said about Clarence, because they never had a damn dime until he started working for the village in Union City. Really?
That I remember my dad saying too.
Yeah.
Is, they've been poor forever until he
Yeah.
got work.
well, now what? And when you're talking about that, I don't know where you want to go, but
Well,
I'm thinking of certain things as they pop into my hand about
Yeah.
Clarence. But we met with John. Bayless. Okay. John is my age. And he's suffering from PSD.
Yeah, see, I remember
Really
John.
bad. Yeah. Anyway, we met with John. John was, we learned a lot of stuff. Well, it turns out that Clarence and Louise and all the younger kids, when they moved from south of Union City to Union City,
No. When they moved from Morinthie, they came in an old Ford touring car.
I thought they had lived over by where Grandpa
No, they
had
didn't.
that farm.
No, they didn't live out there until after Uncle Ray and Aunt Vera got married. And
Oh, okay. So anyway, they moved into where Vera and Roy's farm is. That's where they lived.
So where is the farm out in the middle of nowhere? Must have been where Dad grew up at. There's a farm. We would come on some dirt road back on the way to.
Oh, that was the Clay Road Farm.
Okay.
It's just south of Union City.
But that would have been.
Yeah.
Dad would have been like what then?
Now, see, your dad
Or was he
could've-
gone maybe by then?
your dad may not have lived on Clay Road, but remember there was that other farm that he rented, just around the corner from where great grandpa and grandma on Snow Prairie Road, and we drove down there, and it looked like an old beat up place that they would actually probably.
I might remember
live in.
Snow Prairie Road.
Yeah.
That might be what I'm.
Well, Snow Prairie Road is where William and our great grandparents. That was their last farm.
Yeah.
We know it was like.
But the farm that you probably remember is the farm
I
that
do.
I remember.
Yep, the one we had reunions and
Yes.
hung out at his
And
kids.
that was just south of Union City.
Yeah.
Just to the south of Union City. Well, it turns out Clarence and William both lived in that farm for a while.
After
After
Hannah died,
yes,
because she died, and then
46, I think.
and we found the title work where they she had some kind of a heart seizure or whatever, and that house was so big that
There was.
They
Yeah.
moved-
Back in the day.
they moved into one side of the house, William and Hannah, and then he sold the farm, his farm.
There was a farm about-
just before she died.
Yeah, there was a farm. The last farm he owned was about halfway between Union City and Coldwater
Okay.
Yeah.
on Snow Prairie Road, and we've driven by that. It's a nice looking farm now. Probably was when he had it because he was we think he was a very good businessman, other than when he invested in crops in Canada. But that's how he ended up losing his farm down by Delta, or down by Metamora. But we have
According to Aunt Mary,
yeah, according to Mary,
she said that
yes.
he was always a dreamer, and he's always and I believe that because he ran a steam engine tile machine, and he did.
You got the picture? Did you bring that picture?
I did not.
Okay.
But anyway, he
And so he was stationed in Battle Creek.
but not for long.
No, because then he left Battle Creek and headed right out to California.
And what about Uncle Ivan?
He went in, but the war had been going on when he went in, because he was married with
See, he was married,
Okay,
He was
that's what I
married.
wondered. With his age difference, he had to be older.
and
yeah.
so
And-
he jumped in later.
I don't.
He saw such atrocities. I think he only served like 18 months.
I think
He
so,
was discharged.
maybe a couple of years.
Yeah.
But and then your dad would have went in later in.
Yeah.
in
He was towards the end of.
Well,
Yeah.
we've got
Yeah.
dates. Some of that stuff is
It
his,
is. It's
Yeah.
there.
like when he went in and when he was discharged and everything.
But I knew that Uncle Ivan, and Uncle Bill were ahead of that gig.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
they were.
Right.
Yeah,
They were at the front.
was in for 52 months, 4.5 years.
Now, how long was he over?
2.5 years.
Wow.
I'll tell you a little story about me and Dad. During Vietnam, there was a lot of kids going to Canada to avoid the draft. And it was just Dad and I for some reason in the house. And I had been thinking about this because I
Yeah. Worthless war.
I had a deferment the first year and then I lost it. But so I asked Dad, I said, Dad, what would you think if I went to Canada? Thinking that, he would be really upset if I did something like that. He says, I served for 4.5 years. I figured that's enough for me and both my boys. And if that's what you want to do, I'll support you.
Yeah.
So it was.
I think my dad would have said the same thing.
It was
It
just really surprising.
Yeah.
But
We ain't gonna go over
and then
there.
Gary and I both, I won the lottery, and because then
See,
then the lottery came up, and we both.
I won the political side of it because my lottery number was 212. No, 221. Anyway, and a buddy of mine was 121. And he got his notice he went in May, so he got his notice in April. So I started thinking, what in the hell? I mean, I'm only 100 numbers away.
That gets real, doesn't it?
And this is right when the Tet offensive and when everything was just, they were putting people in like crazy.
And so I was,
68,
why the hell am I waiting? They're gonna come and get me, So I told Dad, I said, you're gonna have to break it to Mom, because she's not gonna wanna hear this. I'm gonna go down and volunteer for the draft. I'm gonna get it over with. Louis 121. I says, at least by July, I'm gone, if you do the math. Because, I mean, when they announced those totals every month, he was like, well, shit, And so Dad just said, well, just wait. And then finally, he said, he goes, I think you're gonna be all right. And I said, why? He says, because the Marshall Bill is being debated in Congress right now, and that was what established the draft.
There was a pause there.
And they didn't draft anybody from, I think it was June until the end of September.
Isn't that crazy?
And the last number they pulled was 197. So I got in, and, he told me, he says, you don't have to go.
Yeah. I just remember.
I was in the first one. I got 354. So now I've actually thought about getting a tattoo with that. It was my lucky.
I said, I took the day off work and sat there and watched
That was
all
in
the
college.
left-hand lottery.
They
numbers
did
all
that,
over.
and I don't even, at that time in my life, I don't know why I wasn't concerned, because I think maybe by 73 or whatever, you knew politics were saying, we're done with this stuff.
And they were
After
starting to-
68,
yeah.
69,
Oh, yeah, 68, 69.
you're like, that's it.
And Nixon had promised to get us out of
Yeah.
Vietnam, so they,
Yeah. Anyway, we're talking about us, but
yeah.
Well,
talk about
here's
some
the
chick
thing.
stuff, but
It goes back to my dad and their dad
Yep.
about who's gonna do what, because I already seen it,
Right.
and I already been there.
yeah.
Yep.
And that's the
Yeah.
way the boys felt, and I'm sure my dad felt the same way, and I'm sure my mom
sure.
thought,
Yeah.
he ain't going, not to that mess.
I'm sure there were parents that said
Yeah.
you should enlist, and then there were
Yeah.
parents that were like,
I'm sure.
based on whatever they saw in Europe.
But I never, my mother never said a word while I was, that year I was in the lottery. She never said a word. And then she told, I overheard her tell somebody, she says, when New Year's, when we moved into that New Year's evening, and Gary had not received a notice yet.
You imagine
She
your
said-
mom, was she at the post office then?
Yeah.
I mean, you imagine all the communication in that little community, and she's right there.
Well-
People who've been killed, people who's
Yeah.
been drafted, people who's been
See,
whatever.
I had a cousin that Paul drew number 8, 6, something. He joined the National Guard.
I don't know my dad. Well, we got, and
And then
John
Bailiff.
Bayless,
Oh, yeah.
he got drafted, but he actually got drafted into the Marines. They were actually drafting into the Marines. And he told me a little bit one day. We were down at the Marzoff reunion. I don't know if you've ever been to the Marzoff
No, I
reunion.
never made that.
You should go to the Marzoff reunion. It's not very big anymore, but
They used
it's
to-
very interesting.
They would stop into the store, that crazy,
Oh, yeah.
that crazy bunch from Marzoff Lane. I always made a big joke about it. You have a street named after you? Harrison Lake.
Yeah.
Harrison Lake.
They go, yeah, we do.
Cause
You
they
should
got,
drive by there.
cause
take a
they
picture.
they got the little gazebo. It's called the Marzoff
Yeah.
gazebo. It's got the name on it.
Well,
So anyway, John was drafted. He said the first thing that happened to him, they took him over to Vietnam and dropped him right in the middle of a rainforest. And so he has PSD. Mike Whitcomb, who is Rose's son, who is Aunt Mildred's grandson, he happens to be my age.
yeah.
He got drafted, but he was He was in the artillery, I think, if I remember. He talked a little bit about that.
See, I remember John's
So they both
picture
did
at their house in his dress blues.
Yeah,
Isn't it funny? I mean, of
Sure.
things you remember,
Yeah.
it's just like, wow. That's,
See, John still lives in their house. 'Cause he's the only child left. All his brothers are gone.
well, he inherited that from
Yeah.
when Aunt Vera died.
somebody got killed in a car wreck.
Yes.
His older brother, Harold Wayne.
Okay.
They're all Wayne.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just remember that was always like sad because that
You know,
happened.
And we happened to be at Grandpa and Grandma's out there on the farm on a Sunday. And we were getting ready to leave to come home. We'd been up there all weekend. And somebody, I don't remember who it was, come and told us that he had been killed the night before. He was heading over to someplace because he had a
Latakia or
girlfriend.
someplace, right?
Yeah, he had a girlfriend. And I don't think it was his fault, but
You know,
But-
they think what he did is he fell asleep
Yeah,
and ran into the back
coming-
end of a semi.
coming back the other way.
You just lay that down, Colin. I just was looking at
That's
that
all right.
stuff.
So yeah, Harold, I can still, I mean, you talk about, I can still remember the funeral was in one of the churches in Union City. And I told Gary this story. I don't know if Gary was there, but,
No,
because I wasn't real old, but anyway, his mother, all through the service, screamed and cried, and just, I can still remember, that's the part I can remember of this funeral. She just, I mean, and maybe I would have done the same thing if it was my son, but, she was just uncontrollable at this funeral. I just so yeah, Harold Wayne. He was in his 20s, maybe mid-20s.
no, it wasn't mid, it was early 20s.
Yeah.
And he just got engaged to this guy.
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
you know,
I think there used to be like his senior picture, graduation
Yes.
picture used to be hanging. I
Yeah.
remember that.
Yes.
yeah,
And it'd just be like, don't even say nothing about
don't
that.
say anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, you didn't finish the story. We're gonna go backwards now on why they wound up living in that.
Oh, in the
Okay.
Bayless.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, they ended up living there, and then that farm at that time was vegetables. It was what do you
Vegetable
call it?
farm.
Oh.
Okay. Well, anyway, all the kids picked vegetables and stuff, and probably old weeds and stuff. So then
But it,
that's how Aunt Vera met Roy, because this was Roy's father's farm, or he had inherited it, I think, by this time.
and that's what brought Grandpa up there, because he got a job.
I'll be
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, they Grandpa and Grandma left and moved out to that farm, but all the kids stayed in the house. So
Oh my God.
I think Vera basically, because then she married Roy. I think she was 16 or 17.
Yeah, she was.
She was, most of them married. The older ones married when they were 16 or 17.
Let's put it this way. Their first child was an infant death.
Yes.
And if you do the math, and if you do the Indiana wedding certificate, it's like she was really probably 16. But everything says 17.
So anyway, she ended up being actually becoming the mother of the 5 or 6 younger,
Yeah.
those that were younger than your dad, were all living in what was Roy and Vera's house that we remember. And John told us that. We did not know that.
And
What Gary was saying, when they drove into town, everybody was laughing because
And
here
all
they
these
were,
kids
they had this
hanging out.
Model T, and all these kids were hanging out of the seats and everything as they were driving into town.
like the Beverly Hillbillies
Like,
coming down.
yes, exactly. That's what comes to mind is
Can you imagine Grandma? I mean, here you
oh
are.
my God. She was
She went,
She was beyond being a saint.
yeah.
How she
There's no
survived.
doubt that she earned the pearly gates.
Oh,
because
yes.
What she had to live through and endure.
I don't know if your dad ever told this story. Dad told this story. One day, this is when they were living in Morenci. So Dad wasn't very old, and Ivan. And they walked into this, something off the kitchen, and Grandma was ready to take down a bottle of lye. I think it was lye. She was gonna drink it. She was gonna end her life. And they stopped her. I mean, that was one of the very few stories that Dad told about his
How old
childhood.
would your dad have been then about?
Well, he left when he was
13.
13, so he was probably, 8, 9, 10 maybe.
Isn't that amazing what they were picking up? They go in there, it's like, nah, can't have
Yeah.
that happen.
That was what, Dad very rarely talked about growing up. Maybe your dad was
No.
the same way.
No, the only thing he would talk about is when they got the hell out of there, like Uncle Pete, Uncle Lloyd, just any of that bunch that was around that same big circle.
And it's funny because
Yeah, it's just thankful that the older ones
Yeah.
picked up those middle and younger kids. and
Ivan
raised them.
Ivan was living with the Lindsay family,
Oh, Lindsay's, yeah.
okay?
Yeah,
But that's,
Which was
Where
Aunt
he
Gertrude's
met-
family.
Yes.
yeah.
he was living with them.
And he was outside of Lyons on the Lindsay farm, probably, I mean,
On
No.
Baker Highway.
Baker
okay.
Highway,
All
just
right.
not too far from Jasper.
okay.
Yeah, and he was living there.
Probably as a farmhand, I'm
Uh,
guessing.
Well, he worked at Stubbs Green too.
Oh, that's
So,
right, that's right.
Anyway, the census says he was a lodger.
Yeah.
Well, and then he and Aunt Gertrude got married, of course, but,
And if you look, it's really interesting because so many, even on the Gilbert side, not mom's side, but on the Schuch side, so many of the women, especially the older ones, were pregnant when they got married. Because Aunt Vera lost her first child. Aunt Mildred lost her second child, right? Or was it the
Third.
first one? Third one? Okay.
but she was pregnant when they got married.
Yeah, she was
They, all,
pregnant.
they were all pregnant when they got married,
Yeah.
even our grandparents. I mean,
That's why they ended up getting
but
married.
that's the way it was.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway.
And then they have 12.
Well,
And
you
some
know,
of them have 12, yes.
yeah,
Not all of them, but some of them do.
but it's just, it's just amazing.
So we're talking about Clarence. We could probably, if you want to step back further, we can go back further, so.
But, and we all know about Clarence's temper and what he did with his
Yeah.
kids, okay? So,
We're left.
and so, I went online, I Googled online, I looked at, and the cell phone number popped up. And finally it was,
That amazing?
it was at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm going, what have I got to lose? They don't have to call me back.
wrong number, you
Right,
have to
you
pick
know.
up.
So, I dialed this number, and a gal, and the voicemail was a female. I'm going, well, okay. So, I was so surprised that I could leave a message. I didn't even leave my damn name. And all I said was, I'm trying to reach Kathy Peterson.
Well, I'm sure your voice was recognized, it's like, that
Yeah.
sounds like your
And,
Yeah.
and all I want to do is just chat with her a little bit. This is her crazy cousin from Michigan. And I hung up. Now after I hang up, about 5 minutes later, I'm going, I didn't even leave your damn name. Okay, so a couple days later, I'm sitting in the living room and phone rings. It's from Florida.
And that's something.
So I answered the phone, and she says, is this my crazy cousin from Michigan? And I said, yeah, it was Kathy. She goes, yeah. She says, you reached my daughter. And she says, let me explain. She goes, when she was a minor, I signed for her to get that cell phone. And it's still in my name. And we've never converted it over. And she said, she was laughing because it was on a Saturday night, And she was laughing. Sunday, she came over to their house and said, "Do you have a crazy cousin in Michigan?" And she goes, "Well, probably." Well, anyway, so that's, and anyway, so.
So you had a chat with her.
We were talking with her, or I was talking to her, and she said, okay, Aunt Audrey, towards the end of her life, lived with Kathy. And she said that she didn't have dementia, but she would, older people have a tendency to go back and, like your dad talking about the concentration camps and this and that. And
It's like me mumbling.
she said, and I'm not gonna bring this up at a family reunion or anything, but she said, my mom said that the reason she moved in with Uncle Harry, okay, which was Clarence's younger brother in Tecumseh, was that Grandpa had assaulted her sexually. And I paused for a moment, and then I went, that doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't. She said and she said her mother said that he was just one of the meanest people ever.
And that young bunch would have really got it.
Yeah, and then she also said, she says, my mom always said the one that was the closest to Grandpa was Uncle Paul.
Absolutely.
That he was just mean, just like that. And then
And we have a distant cousin.
she also,
You could, well, we could branch off of this in a minute.
but she also said that when Uncle Pete and Mary were still alive, they were living down in Florida, that they all got together for whatever, and that Aunt Audrey was talking about some punishment that Grandpa doled out. And what he would do is that he called it his stick, okay? So what are you thinking, a willow stick to whip the kids? Not quite. It was made out of metal. It wasn't wood, it was a metal stick. And that he had punished one of the boys. Now, Chuck, I don't, she didn't know. And that after the punishment, Grandpa had left this metal stick, okay? Well, he took it and hid it in the barn. And he shoved it up behind some rafters and everything. And for the longest time, Grandpa didn't know where it was at. Well, he was out in the barn one day and he found it. So he came in up to the house. He lined up all the kids. He says, I want to know who hid this stick. And not one of the kids said a word. And he says, listen, I'll punish all of you unless somebody tells me, nobody said a thing. He lined them up and whipped them with this damn metal stick.
And never said a word.
And nobody ever said a word. Nobody ratted on anybody, and she said, who would do that? I said, he would.
So what did you know about Uncle Carl?
Uncle Carl was a lifer in the Air Force, he retired.
We worked at Cape Kennedy.
He worked for,
Cape Canaveral.
Yeah, when we went to see him, that's where we went. We went to the Space Center
yeah.
because, when we stayed with him, it's kind of, I don't know what he does, but
Oh,
He was quality, actually.
He actually was one of the last guys the astronauts would shake hands with before they got into their capsule. So whatever he did,
pretty important.
If you look at the obituary, that's not even mentioned. So I don't think he worked there a long time.
No, he didn't work there a long time.
Right.
Because he was in the Air Force for a long time.
Yeah.
He retired from Martin Marietta.
Oh, okay. And that's probably what
He was a quality control guy. But the reason he retired from there was because they shut down the plant.
Oh.
And I remember that when they were, and then he went, and he did work at Cape Canaveral, but when you read the obituary, it's just USA Air Force, and she said, she goes, my dad never got mad. Mm-hmm. And my dad used to say, Carl was one of the nicest guys. She goes, I have a brother. I said, what? Yeah. She goes, my dad, before he went into the military, got the neighbor girl pregnant. And then he went into the military and he came home on leave and he said, well, I'm going to marry her. And her father wouldn't let the marriage go through. And so in Michigan someplace, up around Frankenmuth or someplace, there's Uncle Carl's got a son. The other thing is that we had heard that there was a son born when they were stationed in Arizona, but nobody,
Yeah.
But Kathy confirmed it. She said that there was born prematurely and is buried out in I can't remember where they all put that. But anyway, and that she had another one, but it was more of a miscarriage than an early birth. So
There's a lot of those. It's
You know.
surprising the number of
it's just
that we found.
So how is Kathy doing?
Kathy's doing well. She's retired. She was she did heart catheterizations and sonograms.
Yeah, I just knew medical. I knew she
Yeah,
was involved in the medical end of
Yeah.
things.
And I believe her husband was a physicist, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
She said, well, he was a physicist. And I said, yeah, I wrote it down. I said, I wouldn't understand whatever the hell he did anyway. So, but they still live in Tampa.
Yeah.
And she's the only family member that actually keeps in touch with Janice Schuch, Uncle Ivan's daughter.
Yeah, it's wild.
Because this is crazy, is that Bill and Janice own this winter home down in Tampa.
Oh.
So they get together with them maybe once a year when they're
Isn't
down
that
there.
something?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Janice, last time I saw her was
Their
Dad's funeral.
No,
No,
it is 90th birthday party here at the church.
yes. I was thinking they might have been there for his. But I'm not 100% sure. That's a whole nother story.
Okay, so we got off track.
You could ask Linda.
Well,
Okay.
But I think
I thought it looked like the house we used to go to.
I think we were
Yeah,
in.
it did. I mean, it did look like the house as
That
far
I
as
remember.
I can remember. But
And then I took this from across the room.
What years would you have lived here?
Oh my!
well,
I wasn't
that
even
would
in
have
school.
Okay.
Probably,
oh gosh, had to be in the 50s.
Yeah,
I
would have been in the
Yeah.
50s.
In Lions?
Yes.
And then what's this?
56, 57,
This
something
is
like that.
Grandpa and Grandma's house. This is the little house, and that's the big house on the Meeker farm.
Oh.
Yeah.
But he took it from, evidently, he didn't want to be seen, so he took it from
Well,
afar.
we sometimes.
I'm going to tell you what. I keep telling
Do you see what all he's done to this house?
Yes.
Built that. Now he's got that
Yeah.
big pole barn.
Yeah.
Yeah, we.
I told him once, I said,
Oh, did you?
I'm going to get my ass shot one of these days.
I thought he was. We went into Adrian. I don't know if you remember, when Uncle Pete and Aunt Mary lived in Adrian,
Yeah.
in a brick house.
Isn't that amazing?
So I thought he was going to get shot this time because.
It was on that cul-de-sac street.
Yes, it was on the call. Well, we drove over there to take a picture of the house.
And he's driving, so I get out, and I'm going to go up to the door.
We always try to go up
Yeah.
and tell people.
It's a civilized neighborhood,
Yeah.
we think.
Yeah.
Well, I got on the sidewalk and then I took one step off the public sidewalk onto their sidewalk, and this woman comes shooting out that door, and she goes, "What do you want?" And I'm going, I said, I don't want to bother anybody. I was coming up to the door. I said, my uncle and aunt were the original owners of this house, and I'm doing some genealogy work. And all I want to do is I just want to take a snapshot of the house. You won't see it on Facebook. It will hit no social media. It just goes into a file. And she goes, "Fine." Walk back in the house. I'm going, "Whoa, shit."
So we tended to be able to
Between
find
that and the guy that came to the door at Grandpa and Grandma's old house in Union City, that's the closest that,
But he turned out to be a hell of a nice guy.
So you didn't
Remember
see a fire?
the little house? The little house they
Yeah,
lived
oh,
there?
yeah.
Well, we drove up there and we got talking about should we go up and talk to a person, and I was a little nervous about it myself. Usually I'm the one that goes ahead and does it. So I said, yeah, go up and go ahead, go do it. So
He
goes
never
up
got
and-
out of the damn truck.
I did. So most of the time I'm the one that goes up and knocks on the doors, but this time he did. The guy come out and but he turned out he was a really nice guy. He told us he had
Not at first.
not at first, but then we talked. I went up and we talked, and he had lived next door, I think, and bought this, and he told us about how that this is interesting. Remember, there was kind of two sections,
Yeah.
and then there was a middle section.
Yeah.
Well, those two outer sections had been shacks on a local lake,
Fish camp homes.
fish camp places
Really?
that they had somebody had brought in, set them down, and then they built the center part where the kitchen and was at, and they built that. So he's the one that told us about that.
Yeah, when I told him, I said, you know, I told him who I was. And I said, my grandparents lived in this house. And all I want to do, take a picture. Because I'm doing some genealogy work. He said, your grandparents never lived in this house. My mother and my grandmother.
Yeah,
lived
he
home
did
in
say.
He went
He
into
did,
all,
yeah, he did, didn't he?
into all this in-depth
Yes,
stuff.
yes.
And I said, well, I remember coming here as you know,
Yeah.
when I was 7 or 8 years
Yeah.
old, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I said, and what broke the ice, I said there was 2 or 3 little girls who lived right next door over here. And I said, and my granddad put the basement underneath this. And he looked at me and he says, is that why that goddamn thing is so uneven? And I said, it wouldn't surprise me. I said, you know, he didn't have any money, but he had enough to buy some blocks and some concrete.
It was only about this high.
And
And there was a trap. I don't know if you remember. There was a trap door in the
Yeah.
bathroom.
Yeah, I remember. I just remember that they were up here at the street.
Yeah, and it dipped down like this. Yep.
And you're like, that's kind of weird. When you pull up there,
Yeah.
it's like this.
Yeah.
And then when you go in the house and down, it's like, that's just
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
yeah. Then he finally said, well, yeah. He goes, you know, and then he warmed up.
Then it was yeah. We
And I
talked.
said-
I bet we talked to him for at least a half an hour.
Oh my.
I said, the only,
Yeah.
all I want,
Yeah,
and
I
I
know
went,
that.
He got turned down, and then the next day he was.
yep.
And that was going to be a problem.
Ollie was making her move, and it was like, oh shit.
Yeah, I do remember
That's
that.
when, you know, and I never knew it was Aunt Ollie. Mom finally told me, so
I
she
knew
was
that.
talking
My
to
mom
me.
and dad would laugh, or even when we would be at family get-togethers
Yeah.
and they'd get to tell those
Yeah.
stories, all I knew is something was going on. Norm was not happy with it.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, yeah.
well,
It
I
was
think
it
my
was
mom-
like the next day, right, or something. He asked out my grandma, and she said
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, she said no, and,
And
then
then-
they showed up at the roller rink or whatever, and it was with my Aunt Ollie. And
He just moved on to the next.
I never connected it, and I'm going, oh shit.
I think my mom got on my dad about, he was always working for an implement dealer.
Yeah. I remember
Worked
that.
a lot of hours, probably didn't make much money, and
Yeah.
I think my mom kind of rode my dad about, maybe you should go. And my dad loved doing that stuff,
Yeah.
He hated that damn factory.
Yeah,
But that's where he ended up going to, because I remember him saying, he worked there way before, he was and he left the transmission plant
right.
and then ended up finishing up there. But I think my mom kind of wrote him a little bit about maybe a nicer car or whatever. We always lived on the family farm.
Right.
Never
And
really
get
had-
benefits. I mean, healthcare and pension and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff by going to
Yeah.
a big company. You might not even have that.
Yeah, I know.
I'll
It
tell you
ended
what,
up being a
it's-
good thing, but
Oh yeah, I know.
just looking at that right there, that's a scary guy.
It is. You look
You
at
can
it.
call me grandpa or whatever, but them eyes are like,
But no, you're absolutely correct.
you get that hair back and that, and
Yeah.
I wasn't just I was never scared of him, but as a grandchild, he never.
I sure like my grandma Schuch. I know that
Oh,
much.
yeah. She was a sweetheart.
She was,
I think that's the only reason that we ever went up there and visited.
Well, I'm sure.
If it had been just Grandpa by himself,
Yeah.
I don't think Dad would have
I think
ever went and seen him.
if we ever went, my mom was the reason we're
Yep.
going
Yes.
to
Gertrude
see your
was-
mom.
Yep.
We're going to see your mom.
yep,
And-
that's exactly, yeah.
Yep, she was the sweetest. How she survived that and lived to be about 90 years old.
I'll bet you that whole drive up there was
How about
probably my
80?
dad wondering, why in the hell am I doing this?
I'm sure my dad felt
Yep.
the same way. My dad, we'd go up there and you stay all night and my dad wouldn't say a word to him.
So
See,
okay, I'm
remember
connecting
seeing-
now. This is the funeral with no tears.
Yeah.
When
But
he
we'd go up there.
We go up and stay. at
We
this
let him
little
spend the
house.
night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we spent
a,
the
a
night.
tear shed for that
Us
man.
kids would
Okay.
sleep on the floor.
Yeah.
And my dad would sit there and the entire time he was there, if my granddad spoke to him, he would speak. But other than that, there was just no conversation whatsoever.
I'll bet your mom was just like my mom. If there was
Yeah.
any conversation going on, it was between her and grandma and whatever they would talk about.
Well, and okay, so we're telling stories here, not doing what we really, I guess this is what it's all about. Anyway, we were up there once.
We can go back further if you want.
We were, I think that's where you got your first shot of whiskey.
Adam,
When
come and look at
poured you
this.
that glass
You'll love these two, but here's 25th anniversary
of
with
whiskey.
Grandpa and Grandma.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember drinking the.
So where'd you get your first?
Okay, so
Anyway, I don't remember that.
we
but
were
anyway.
up at Grandma's, and I just remember that Grandpa evidently had a
Bottle
glass,
somewhere.
a glass of whiskey every night or something.
Oh, okay.
And he said, I always like it with rock candy. So he takes this rock candy out on the strip, sets it in, and then he fills the glass up halfway with bourbon or cheap whiskey,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. And I can remember him sitting there and he's going, well, how old are you now? To him. And I think Calvin was like 16 or whatever. Well, you're old enough. And I couldn't believe it because this was in front of my mother, okay? And it was like, but he poured him a small glass. My dad never said a thing. My mom never said a thing. He drank it, and I'm going, shit, he's gonna get drunk. I just remembered that.
I don't
My brother's
remember
gonna be drunk. You know?
Crazy.
I remember drinking some hard cider.
Maybe it was hard cider. I don't know.
Well, but that was at
that was at another.
that was on the
But
Gilbert side.
I just remember that.
I don't remember doing that.
But to tell you what this parents was like, okay?
You can tell the
So-
story about the riding in the car.
No, well, I'm gonna tell that story too. But,
Okay, that's kind of an important
So-
story too.
So anyway, we were up there once.
We gotta-
Staying all night. The two neighbor girls come over and want to drive Grandpa's Ford tractor. And they go out
Ford
back and we were
tractor.
distant.
Good Lord, I remember
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
We did have a little Ford truck.
And he said, oh, sure. So they went out, got on it and took off. And Grandma said, well, don't you think you should go out and watch them? Because they weren't that old. And Grandpa got immediately pissed and said, you're not going to tell me what to do. And if you try, I'm going to bat you. And my mother stood there and she goes, you're going to have to get through me first. Next thing we saw, Grandpa turned on his heel and went out and watched those kids on that track.
Yeah, mom was one of the few
Mom
people
was just,
that actually would stand up to him, and basically he was a chicken because if he would, like Gary said, he would turn right around. He was, but
Well, you know why? Because she's Gilbert.
oh yeah, and
no shit.
And even though Uncle Lloyd wasn't much of a guy,
You knew it. There's
He had an
stories there
opinion.
too, so.
and he let you tell, he
He does.
announced it, and it's just like, whatever he's got going on, that's,
Yep.
I'm not arguing with that.
so we got this other story.
There's this other story.
This
is
is
that
a,
my dad was the first one of the boys that went in the military. And you had to have your paycheck sent to a family member. Okay? Well, he had it sent to my grandmother. Well, the other kids found out that Grandma wasn't banking it because she wasn't allowed to do anything.
Right.
Yeah, she couldn't
And
touch money.
that
Right.
Grandpa was cashing the checks and living the high life.
Oh God.
And so they finally got to my dad and said, listen, you've got to change this. So what he did is he had it changed over to my Aunt Luella, okay? So
So now we're years later.
now this is years later. I'm probably 11, 12 years old, but on Sunday, Grandpa always drove down to a little party store to get a Detroit Free Press. I remember that too. And I would ride with him occasionally, but asked Dad, he goes, I want you to ride with me. So I'm in the back seat of the car, we're driving down the road.
I'm there too. I remember it now. I remember.
And he says, he says, I think I owe you about $2,000. And my dad looked at him and says, yeah. No, nothing, yeah. And he goes, I have it in my wallet right now. Would you like it? Now I'm thinking, $2,000.
Yeah, that's
My dad,
the world's most money.
yeah, my dad looked at him and says, nope. That was the end of the conversation. And I never asked him later, but it was pretty much that if he'd have accepted the money, he would have acknowledged that it was okay
Right.
for his dad to steal from him.
Right.
And yeah, it was like,
And it lets him. It gives him relief that he.
yeah.
It's like
yeah,
no,
it's like
you.
It just,
And I'm earning that money in a war, and you're living the high life. Yeah.
You're living the high life. So, but
So anyway,
Yeah, so different than your
you
dad
should know
did.
what your great grandfather was.
and you hit your dad with a coffee pot.
Yeah.
It's
Put a
yeah.
dent in the coffee pot too, I think, if I remember right.
And now I'm going to add to that story. This is according to my mom. Is that later on they were up there, probably when they lived at the Clay Road Farm or whatever, and Grandma looked at my mom and said, "Would you like that big coffee pot?" And my mom says, "I have no need for it." And she says, "Well, it'll never be used here again because that's what Clarence hit Chuck in the head with." And she took it and she hid it so that it never happened again.
They're big on hiding stuff around there, weren't they?
Oh,
If he can beat you with it, get rid of it.
Well, I'm sure.
And as we're going up the driveway, she's got it in one of those pie carrying things, the Tupperware one, and somehow the bottom dropped out of it and hit the ground. And she was not happy. She was like, I can't believe it. I can't.
Yeah.
Here comes Uncle Pete with a spoon.
that wouldn't surprise me. Right
He
off
told
the
him,
damn ground.
don't worry about nothing.
Yep.
I got it.
But you're right. He loved chocolate cream pie.
Did you read a story with him? He used to drive a lot of Oldsmobiles, at least when I was a kid.
Yeah, I remember it.
And he would send Aunt Mary in to get some bags of feed and stuff. They just throw them in the trunk of this car.
Car didn't matter, did it? It might as well
So
be a
one
truck.
day, I think Mom told me this story. One day they were out driving, and there was a mouse in the car, and this mouse went up his fat leg while he was driving.
No way.
And he's driving along going like this, you goddamn son! Oh, sorry about that. I'm sorry. But then he's stopping his leg and everything as he's driving, trying to get this mouse out of his pants.
I tell you, there were some characters, weren't there?
Yeah.
Oh my
Uncle
God.
Pete was something else.
When we go either to Uncle Lloyd's or Uncle Pete's, all I remember
Where
is
we normally migrate.
being a kid
One of
was
those.
there's a lot of noise in this house. Them adults would be after
we
each
were some
other.
of the loudest damn people.
They would be laughing.
Because the Gilberts like that. We are too. I do that to my brother all the time. But we talk over each other.
Oh, that just,
And they would do that. They would talk over each other.
they would have such a hoot and done. They'd be in there playing cards.
Everybody have their cigarettes. There'd be cigarette ashes all over the place.
Aunt Mary was probably the loudest talker.
Oh yes,
Oh my
yes,
God.
she was.
She screamed everything, even when she was happy.
Yeah.